A Ravens player walked through the front door of Steve Bisciotti's home on a Tuesday afternoon, sat down in the billionaire owner's living room, and proceeded to tell him everything that was broken inside the Baltimore Ravens organization. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was an intervention, and by the time that player walked out, the fate of John Harbaugh, a coach who had spent 18 years building a dynasty, was sealed. What Steve Bisciotti heard that day, and what he heard from multiple other players throughout that afternoon, changed everything. The real story behind John Harbaugh's stunning dismissal isn't what you've been told. It's so much deeper, more personal, and more explosive than anyone imagined. If you want the full, uncensored truth about what really went down behind closed doors in Baltimore, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to reveal will blow your mind. This isn't speculation. This is the real story that Steve Bisciotti himself will have to answer for. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand why Steve Bisciotti made the most controversial decision of his ownership tenure, you need to understand who Steve Bisciotti is and how he operates as an NFL owner. Steve Bisciotti isn't like other NFL owners. He didn't inherit his money. He didn't get lucky with oil or real estate. He built a staffing empire from scratch, starting Aerotech with his cousin out of a basement office with secondhand equipment when he was just 23 years old. Today, the Allegis Group that grew from that basement startup is an international talent management firm worth billions. Bisciotti knows about building organizations, evaluating talent, and most importantly, knowing when it's time to make a change. When Bisciotti took over full ownership of the Baltimore Ravens in 2004, he inherited head coach Brian Billick, the man who had won Super Bowl 31. For 3 years, Bisciotti watched as the Ravens went 33-33 under his ownership. 2 losing seasons, 1 playoff appearance that ended immediately, and Bisciotti didn't like what he was seeing. More importantly, he didn't like what he was hearing. In December 2007, after the Ravens collapsed to a 5-11 record following a franchise-best 13-3 season the year before, Bisciotti made a decision that would define his ownership philosophy. He fired Brian Billick, a Super Bowl-winning coach who still had 3 years and $15 million remaining on his contract. When asked about it years later, Bisciotti acknowledged that player feedback was instrumental in that firing. He talked to his team, he listened to what they were saying about the coach, and he acted. Fast forward 18 years to January 2026, and history was repeating itself. On Monday, January 6th, the day after Tyler Loop's missed field goal ended the Ravens' season, John Harbaugh walked into a meeting at the Ravens facility. Waiting for him were General Manager Eric DaCosta, Executive Vice President Ozzie Newsome, and Team President Sashi Brown. Notably absent was Steve Bisciotti. For hours, they discussed Harbaugh's vision for the team's future. They talked about potential changes to the coaching staff. They discussed the roster. According to sources, the situation was described as unsettled, but momentum seemed to be pointing toward Harbaugh returning. Many people at the facility believed a coaching staff reset was needed. Maybe some coordinators would be let go, but nobody expected complete regime change. Harbaugh left that Monday meeting believing he would be back for year 19. He went home thinking the worst-case scenario was that he'd have to make some uncomfortable staff changes. He had no idea what was about to happen, because on Tuesday, Steve Bisciotti went to work. And this is where the real story begins. Throughout that Tuesday, Bisciotti conducted a series of conversations with Ravens players. This wasn't a formal process. There were no surveys or official meetings scheduled. Instead, Bisciotti personally reached out to key members of his team, asking them point-blank about John Harbaugh's leadership, about the direction of the organization, and about whether they believed this coaching staff could take them to a championship. One Ravens player didn't just have a phone conversation with Bisciotti. That player drove to the owner's house on the Severn River and sat down for an extensive, in-depth discussion about the state of the team. Think about what that means. A player felt strongly enough about the situation that he went to the owner's home for a face-to-face conversation. That's not normal. That's not how NFL organizations typically operate. That's a player who felt the situation had become critical enough to bypass every chain of command and go straight to the top. What did Bisciotti hear during these conversations? According to multiple sources who spoke with The Athletic, ESPN, and other outlets, the feedback was damning. Players told Bisciotti that Harbaugh's message had grown stale. His style of coaching, once motivating and effective, was now rubbing people the wrong way. Younger players and star players felt disconnected from Harbaugh's approach. His meetings, once energizing, had become repetitive and at times contradictory. Some players described feeling like Harbaugh wasn't adapting to the current generation of NFL players. One player told reporters that Harbaugh's messages rubbed some people the wrong way and could be contradictory. Another source said, if his message wasn't leading us in the right direction, then obviously something needed to change. These weren't role players complaining about playing time. These were core members of the team expressing fundamental concerns about leadership. But here's what makes this story even more explosive. The single biggest pressure point, according to Diana Russini of The Athletic, was John Harbaugh's refusal to discuss parting ways with offensive coordinator Todd Monken.
Let's break this down because it's crucial to understanding why Bisciotti ultimately pulled the trigger. Throughout the 2025 season, the relationship between Lamar Jackson and Todd Monken deteriorated. Monken's hard-driving coaching style didn't mesh well with Jackson's personality. There was weekly confusion about whether Jackson would practice due to his numerous injuries. The communication between quarterback and coordinator wasn't what it had been during Jackson's MVP season in 2024. According to sources who spoke with Outkick, Steve Bisciotti wanted John Harbaugh to fire Todd Monken. The owner believed that finding a new offensive coordinator could unleash Lamar Jackson to return to his dynamic MVP-caliber form. It was a reasonable request. Coordinators get replaced all the time in the NFL. It's a normal part of the business. But John Harbaugh refused. Harbaugh stood by Monken, defending his coordinator and the offensive system that had produced a historically great offense just 1 year earlier. Harbaugh reportedly put the onus back on Lamar Jackson, suggesting the quarterback needed to do a better job taking care of his body rather than scapegoating the coaching staff for offensive struggles. Harbaugh was so confident in Monken that sources say he's expected to try to bring Monken with him to his next coaching job. This created an impossible situation for Steve Bisciotti. On one side, he had his 28-year-old franchise quarterback, a two-time MVP, under contract through 2028 with a massive cap hit, expressing frustration with his offensive coordinator. On the other side, he had his 63-year-old head coach refusing to make the change that could appease his star player. Bisciotti was forced to choose between his franchise's present and future, or his franchise's past glory.
And Bisciotti chose Lamar Jackson. Multiple sources confirmed to Outkick that this decision to move on from Harbaugh was fundamentally about the franchise quarterback wanting a new direction for himself and the offense, while the coach wanted to stick by his coaching staff. When ownership got caught in the middle, Bisciotti ultimately sided against Harbaugh. In his statement announcing the firing, Bisciotti was clear about his priorities, saying their goal has always been and will always be to win championships. The subtext was obvious. Bisciotti believed that winning championships with Lamar Jackson required removing John Harbaugh. So, on Tuesday afternoon, as John Harbaugh drove home from the Ravens facility, his phone rang. It was Steve Bisciotti. And in that phone call, Bisciotti informed Harbaugh that after 18 years, 180 regular season wins, 13 playoff victories, and a Super Bowl championship, his services were no longer needed. The phone call while driving. Let that sink in for a moment. 18 years of loyalty, of building a culture, of representing the organization with class and integrity, and it ended with a phone call while Harbaugh's car rolled down a Baltimore County road? No face-to-face meeting, no final handshake in the office where they had celebrated championships and weathered storms together? Just a voice on the phone delivering the news that it was over. The reaction to this detail was swift and brutal. NFL fans across social media called it cold-blooded, cruel, disrespectful, and absolutely a clown show. One fan wrote, "A person is in a relationship for 18 years and a breakup happens over the phone? Got no respect for Steve Bisciotti or any human that does that." Another added, "Almost 20 years and that's the way it went down? Harbaugh deserved much better." It wasn't until Thursday, 2 days after that phone call, that Bisciotti and Harbaugh spoke again in depth. By then, emotions had settled, and Bisciotti wanted to provide further explanation of his decision. But the damage was done. The manner of the dismissal had already shocked the football world. Within minutes of Harbaugh being notified, General Manager Eric DeCosta rounded up Harbaugh's coaching staff. According to one assistant coach who witnessed it, DeCosta fought back tears as he informed them that their head coach had been relieved of his duties. That's how abrupt this was. DeCosta, Harbaugh's next-door neighbor and close friend for years, was emotionally devastated by having to deliver this news. At 5:50 p.m. on Tuesday, Ravens players joined a virtual call with DeCosta, who told them it was a hard day for everybody. But by then, most players had already found out through social media or text messages from friends. There was no carefully orchestrated announcement, no team meeting where Bisciotti could explain his reasoning, just chaos and confusion as the news leaked out and spread like wildfire. So what's the real reason John Harbaugh was fired? According to sources close to the situation, it wasn't any single factor. It was a perfect storm of circumstances that convinced Steve Bisciotti his franchise needed a new direction. First, there were the on-field failures. The Ravens blew a 15-point fourth-quarter lead to Buffalo in Week 1. They started 1-5, matching the worst start in franchise history. They got humiliated at home multiple times, finishing 3-6 at M&T Bank Stadium, the worst home record in franchise history. They failed to win back-to-back playoff games in any single season since the Super Bowl after the 2012 season. Tyler Loop's missed field goal was just the latest in a long line of execution failures in critical moments. Second, there was the cultural disconnect. Bisciotti heard from multiple players that Harbaugh's demanding program and old-school coaching style wasn't connecting with the current roster. Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer reported that ownership questioned how well Harbaugh fit with the roster. For a decade and a half, the team was built in Harbaugh's image, with leaders who bought into his demanding approach and served as his torchbearers. But that generation of Ravens was gone. The roster had turned over, and the new generation of players, particularly younger stars, weren't responding to Harbaugh's message the way previous teams had. Third, there was the Lamar Jackson factor. Whether you believe Jackson actively campaigned for Harbaugh's removal or simply expressed frustration with the offensive coordinator, the reality is that Bisciotti prioritized his franchise quarterback's happiness over his head coach's loyalty. Multiple sources were surprised by the supposed power struggle between Harbaugh and Jackson, noting that nobody in the organization defended and praised Jackson more than Harbaugh did. But perception became reality, and Bisciotti clearly believed that Jackson's best chance to reach his potential required a new voice leading the team. Fourth, and perhaps most damning, there was John Harbaugh's refusal to adapt. When Bisciotti wanted Monken fired, Harbaugh dug in his heels. When players expressed concerns, Harbaugh defended his approach. A source told The Athletic that there were a number of things that they felt needed to be fixed, and Bisciotti no longer saw Harbaugh, his longtime coach and friend, as the right person to do it. Think about that phrase. Bisciotti didn't just fire a coach, he fired his longtime friend. These two men had spent 18 years building something together. They'd celebrated a Super Bowl, they'd weathered 3-win seasons, they'd negotiated contract extensions, and made countless decisions side by side. And now, Bisciotti was saying that friendship wasn't enough. Winning championships mattered more. Is this fair? That's the question Ravens fans and NFL observers have been debating since the moment the news broke. On one hand, John Harbaugh is the 14th winningest coach in NFL history. He had only 3 losing seasons in 18 years. He took the Ravens to 12 playoffs. He delivered a championship.
He represented the organization with class and integrity every single day. On the other hand, the NFL is a what have you done for me lately business. 13 years without a Super Bowl is an eternity in professional football. The failures and big moments had piled up, and if your franchise quarterback and key players are telling you they need a change, do you ignore them and hope things magically improve? Steve Bisciotti clearly decided he couldn't afford to wait and see. Just like he did with Brian Billick in 2007, Bisciotti listened to his players, assessed the situation, and made the gut-wrenching decision to move on from a coach he personally respected and valued. In his official statement, Bisciotti emphasized that this decision came after a comprehensive evaluation of the season and the overall direction of our organization. He said it was an incredibly difficult decision, given the tremendous 18 years we have spent together and the profound respect I have for John as a coach, and most importantly, as a great man of integrity. But then, Bisciotti pivoted to what matters most to him. He said, "Our goal has always been and will always be to win championships. We strive to consistently perform at the highest level on the field and be a team and organization our fans take pride in." Translation, John Harbaugh wasn't going to get us another championship, so we're moving on. Bisciotti knows this is a massive gamble. He acknowledged as much back in 2007 when he fired Billick, saying, "I could be 3 coaches past Brian Billick 9 years from now trying to solve this puzzle." That fear didn't stop him then, and it didn't stop him now. Bisciotti is betting that a new voice, a fresh perspective, and an offense designed specifically to maximize Lamar Jackson will deliver the championship that's eluded Baltimore for over a decade. The immediate aftermath has been surreal. Within 45 minutes of being fired, Harbaugh's agent received calls from 7 NFL teams expressing interest. The New York Giants are reportedly the favorites to land him. The Dolphins, Raiders, Titans, and Browns are all interested. Harbaugh signed a 3-year extension just 9 months ago and was under contract through 2028, but that doesn't matter now. He'll be coaching somewhere in 2026, probably with a better roster situation than the team that just fired him. Meanwhile, Bisciotti and DaCosta are scheduled to face the media for the first time since the firing. The questions will be brutal. Did you fire Harbaugh because of player pressure? Did Lamar Jackson essentially choose between you and the coach? Why didn't you give Harbaugh a face-to-face meeting after 18 years? Did you really fire a Hall of Fame caliber coach over the phone? Are you repeating the same mistake you made with Billick, or are you making the bold move necessary to win another championship? Only time will tell if Steve Bisciotti made the right call, but one thing is absolutely certain. The real reason John Harbaugh was fired had nothing to do with missing the playoffs or Tyler Loop's missed field goal. It had everything to do with an owner who listened to his players, heard that his franchise quarterback wanted change, realized his head coach refused to make that change, and decided that 18 years of loyalty wasn't enough to overcome the dysfunction brewing inside his organization. Steve Bisciotti sided with his star quarterback over his star coach. He chose the future over the past. And he did it in the coldest, most abrupt way possible, with a phone call while Harbaugh drove home, ending one of the most successful coaching tenures in NFL history. Now the Ravens begin their search for just the 4th head coach in franchise history. Whoever gets that job will inherit enormous pressure, a franchise quarterback with influence, and the shadow of a man who won 180 games and delivered a championship. The stakes couldn't be higher, and Steve Bisciotti's legacy as an owner now depends entirely on whether this shocking, ruthless decision pays off with another Super Bowl trophy.